I'm more and more convinced that trauma happens in the small moments of our lives. So a memory is created, the neurons imprint chemicals onto that hologram, connect a negative cognition or a negative belief about ourselves, and then it gets filed. The negative belief that I had about myself was that my voice doesn't matter. I'm insignificant. As I go through the rest of my life, any other time that I'm made to feel inadequate, insignificant, the brain opens up that file and says, oh, we felt this way at this point in our life, and at this point in our life, and at this point in our life. And so these past experiences now get pushed into our present. That is essentially a broad definition of trauma. Something that's happened to us in our past that now is affecting us in our present day. And it happens in the small moments of our life.
If you're a man that controls his own destiny, a man that is always in the pursuit of being better, you are in the right place. You are responsible. You are strong. You are a leader. You are a force for good. Gentlemen, you are the Alpha, and this is the Alpha Quorum.
Welcome back to the Alpha Quorum Show. Brad Singletary here. I'm excited to continue our series on addiction and addiction recovery. Our guest today is one of our all-time favorites here. Jimmy Durbin is joining us. Jimmy's in long-term recovery from pornography, alcohol, heroin, meth, bulimia, and prescription pills. His history includes a suicide attempt, depression, self-hate, hearing voices, and homelessness. Through God's tender mercies, while applying the 12 steps of recovery and implementing a spiritual program of action into his life, Jimmy has become aware of his pride, ego, character traits, and developed a manner of living that allows him to live wholehearted. Today, he shares his story of redemption, stands as a sentinel for those who struggle or love someone who does. He shares his experience, strength, and hope so that others won't suffer alone. Jimmy has the unique ability to connect with people, hold them accountable, love unconditionally, and live vulnerably. Jimmy provides a roadmap and personal support for those who desire to change and transform their lives. Jimmy teaches how to metabolize 4 energies that every human interacts with each day: stress, shame, trauma, and grief. He understands the importance of providing the keys that unlock the gate to long-term sobriety, mental health, serenity, emotional healing, and spirituality. Gentlemen, please welcome back to the Alpha Quorum Show, Jimmy Durbin.
Hello, Bradley.
Welcome back, dude. Good to see you.
Good to be back.
You look good as always. I'm glad I got the light worked out so we can see all your cool features over there. Jimmy's one of these guys, man, that I can't do this. I have to keep my same look, but Jimmy's always got a little bit of different look, a little different haircut, do some facial hair, just his clothing and everything. He's always kind of mixing it up. And I like that. That always looks fresh, but I can't do that. My kids tell me if I dare shave, they're going to disown me. So welcome back, dude.
Thanks, brother. It's good to be with you.
I just want to start this with talking about some of your background. So first of all, Jimmy has a master's degree in social work, is licensed at the highest level in his field as a licensed clinical social worker. And also, what's that other license? Licensed
clinical alcohol and drug counselor.
Licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor. So this is a specialized training, and there's, hours of internship and so forth. You had to take an exam. I think in that one, you have to sit before a board, right? This Correct. Is not just written. You got to stand in front of some people and kind of be judged.
Yeah, there's an oral part to the exam, yeah.
Yeah, I had that license before and I let it lapse. I probably just didn't have the money to renew one year. And I didn't want to go back to that board and have to report. So welcome back, man. We have had a couple of guests on who have been, and Jimmy has been instrumental in their lives. I'm not going to mention their names here, but some of the people, if you've been listening to this whole series, some of the men who've been on this show have been directly influenced by Jimmy Durbin. And Jimmy's a therapist here in the Henderson, Nevada area, and is just one of the best men that I know. But professionally, I mean, I don't even know how you ever get to go home at night. I mean, you must have a full schedule. You're doing very well in your practice.
Yeah, thank you.
So Jimmy's here to talk to us today. We're going to continue this series on addiction and addiction recovery. He's obviously been through some of that himself. I'll let him briefly kind of share his background with compulsive behaviors of all types, it looks like. Pornography, alcohol, heroin, meth, bulimia, pills. So just run us through a short, I guess, history for some context here about your personal experience with addiction recovery.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And as you said in the intro, I just never really felt comfortable being me. And a lot of that, I think, was just the environment I grew up in. We just seemed to move as a family every 18 to 24 months. So it was always a new school, a new environment, and having to get new friends, leave friends. And I do remember at 6 years old having a memory. We were leaving. I had my best friend. Again, I'm in first grade, but I had my girlfriend there, and they're standing on the sidewalk and we're pulling away in the car, and I'm just looking out the back of the car and just crying. And like a 6-7-year-old would cry, that's not going to see their friends anymore. And that had a lot to do with, I think, the beginning of me putting up heart walls and putting up this blockade and encasement around my heart. And I think that just grew in size and intensity as we continued to move, so that I wouldn't hurt, or I should say that little boy wouldn't be hurt like he was at that moment. So, decades later in therapy and going through my own work, it was to try to get back to that little boy. So what did I do? I used behaviors and substances in an unhealthy way to disconnect me from the pain. And that just became the pattern. And I think that as you look at the cycle of addiction, that's part of it. And as we get into it with the 12 steps or any 12-step program, it's a pattern of living. It's a program, right? And it's, as you and I know from a clinical standpoint, it's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's changing one's thinking to change one's behavior. And it just so happened for me that everything came crashing down at the age of 42. And I've said this to you before, I'm the just guy, right? I'm just good looking enough, just well spoken enough, just well educated enough to get over, through, around whatever kind of life threw at me. The trust in Jim, so to speak. And that worked until it didn't. And at that point, I had to examine and look and sort through and work through the trauma of all the things that I had been avoiding my entire life. And there's a divorce in there. My mom was raped, the moving around, not feeling good enough, feeling inadequate. I'm not lovable. I just didn't. There's this voice that continues to edify that I suck. I'm a piece of shit. You're never going to measure up. You always take shortcuts. You never go the full length. You don't know how to be honest. And that was my truth. That was the engine that just drove everything. So I had to hide. Even in my work career, I was moving every couple of years. I worked on the Strip for 22 years. I worked at 11 different resorts.
Wow.
And it was just this, if you really found out about me, if my shtick was over in about 2 years. And so I had to move on, move environments, move scenes.
You pissed everybody off or what?
Or
burnt bridges or whatever?
self-sabotage. Yeah, I do something stupid. Yeah, I had a pattern that I would just implode everything, self-destruct in varying degrees to either remove myself from that scene so that I could start over and rebuild. And I used all of those things and more. And I think the first one from a young age was just sugar, using sugar and disconnecting, avoiding the pain, and then just that cycle over and over and over again.
You mentioned earlier, I think the word you said was heart walls. So even as a young kid, you're saying that moving away, leaving your little girlfriend and your friends, that was the beginning of putting up heart walls.
Yeah.
And that continued until you started using substances. And
I've seen that in my own practice. That's, you can put it into your own words, but we protect ourselves and we put a barricade. I would say now I would frame that as between myself and connection, myself and God, myself and spirit, whatever word or label works for you. And so that barricade, those heart walls, is the way it worked for me to frame it, that I had to break down this wall and I had to connect to my heart, connect to my feelings. And as a man, that's not what society teaches. As growing up, that's not what I heard or was pattern or I saw in my environment growing up. It was just everything's okay, and you just stuff the feelings down. And men don't cry, and women want the white horse and chivalry, and that it took me a while to connect to that.
So I'm curious about, what you see in your practice. So you've helped just probably hundreds of people by this time, and through the 12-step program, sponsoring people, we're running meetings, doing some leadership roles there. And then now having a full-time life as a licensed therapist, working with people in a counseling setting. They come to you. What do you see just kind of across the board with men who are addicted or have compulsive behaviors? We're talking everything from pornography, gambling, sex, drugs, alcohol, whatever thing. What can you say, not just from your personal experience, but from your professional view of this stuff? What goes on with people?
Yeah, I think when I first meet someone or just kind of put them at ease, the way that I explain it is that as humans, all of us have a containment device. And those feelings that are uncomfortable, we suppress or push down into this containment device. And a couple things happen. The containment device gets full, and we reach a certain age. It seems to be 35, 40 for men, where that containment device starts to erode. And this is off the premise that your body keeps the score. Feelings buried alive never die, and everything's connected. So these feelings that get locked in this containment device in the body never die. They just turn really, really toxic in the body. And so a couple things can happen. We reach a certain age and the containment device starts to erode, and those toxic feelings, that toxicity, seeps out the bottom of the containment device and percolates to the surface of the earth and causes problems. And or a life event happens, and that containment device either implodes or it explodes, and those toxic feelings just get everywhere. And that's usually in the addiction sense when people are in crisis and they're in that loop and they're just swimming in that toxicity and the shame of it and the trauma of it.
So we're just kind of stuffing this stuff down.
Yeah.
You say containment device is just a corner of our body there somewhere. You're saying the body keeps the score, so we kind of hold on to that stuff, and the containment device wears out, thins out, the garbage bag tears, from all the stuffing of everything in there, and we get to a certain point, some sooner, some later, but we reach a place where it all comes, erupting out of there. So we're imploding or exploding. And what does that look like? The imploding or exploding? A meltdown?
It could be a job change. It could be divorce. It could be challenge with children. It could be a physical loss. It could be a financial loss. I mean, just life, the stressors of life. A stressor, an external stimulus happens, and it overloads the system, and it either explodes or implodes. And I think COVID was one that accelerated that. And just seeing what happens when we lose connection with what is our normal routine and our normal people. And it's problematic. And I think it's a human thing. I believe it happens to all of us. And depending on your framework and if you're connected to an organized religion or not, or a faith, or not, it's an opportunity to step into a space or on that path of self-love for the first time, or again. And for me, that's just the game of life, that we're tested and tried, and we have struggles and trials. And then if you get into the energy work of it, what I always say is, Brad, you have two energies in that flesh suit that you're wearing. You have your authentic, true, spiritual essence. That is whole. That is capable. That is worthy. That is lovable. That is enough. Period. And then you have the dude, the antithesis of love. Framed in AA, it's our character defects. It is our inauthentic, false part, identity, or self. And that's, for me, the yin and the yang. That's the friction that's caused between those two things. And only one of you can be driving, and the other one's locked in the trunk. So as I was unraveling all of this for myself, it was Jim versus Jimmy. And Jimmy is my whole, capable, worthy. Jimmy is enough in every part of his life, in every situation. Jimmy is love, a little boy who wants to love and be loved. Jim is my drug-addicted, voyeuristic, white privileged, male chauvinistic, racist, biased dirtbag. And he doesn't want to give up the oxygen. He doesn't want to give up the oxygen. And so from that standpoint, if that framework works for an individual, just like the program of 12 steps works, then you can kind of conceptualize and kind of reframe really what's going on. Because I think in any relationship, right, especially interpersonal, it collapses on itself, and what we'll call enmeshment, right? So there's this entanglement. And so I can't see where Jimmy starts and Jim begins and Jim ends and Jimmy ends as well. It's just all twisted. So we start using these words like, I am unlovable. I am unworthy. I did something wrong. I'm not safe. So the question I have when someone says those types of things is, well, who is the I? Who is the I? And start to pull apart that so that we can give credit to what belongs to Jim and start to give credit for what belongs to Jimmy.
You mentioned earlier, you were talking about this implosion or explosion. I wonder if it kind of starts to leak out. You know, maybe there's a big event, there's a massive, you know, there's a divorce, some big change or whatever, but does it show itself way before that? And what I would predict is, you know, stuff like irritability, frustration, just, you know, I talk through my teeth. I'm talking to my kids like this. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there are indicators of that happening way before you've blown everything and just ruined your whole life.
Absolutely.
Because some of the guys listening to this right now, you know, they may not need to reach that terrible explosion or implosion. Maybe they can take a look at how pissy they are.
Yeah. I mean, it's awareness,
mm-hmm.
right? Mindfulness. We know physiologically, biologically, the body's an instrument. We have a vagus nerve that goes from the brain stem, connects to all the major organs and tissues in the body. That 20% of our nerve endings come from our brain to the body, and 80% goes from the body to the brain.
Wow.
So there's constant feedback being sent from the body up to the brain. But as men, we're told, or we vote our feelings off the island. Feelings become a liability. And so, you know, as well as I do, a lot of the work with men is getting back in touch with how am I feeling and embracing that, because it's processing through those, right? We need to feel it to heal it. And so, yeah, absolutely. Autoimmune diseases are a result of stress. Autoimmune disease means that the body only has 100% energy to devote. And so if it's sending 90 to 95% of that energy to keep the body, brain, and soul in a homeostasis, just level, right? With all the different stressors poking in on that system, it has little energy for repair and regrowth of the nervous system. So if you look at a shoelace, the plastic cap on the shoelace, that's kind of what our nerve endings have as a protective coating. But it takes energy, and it takes the body sending energy to those nerves to repair and keep those nerves growing. But if there's continual stress, then we get autoimmune diseases. And I do think it shows up that way if we're paying attention to it. And then the other thing I would say to you is, you know, when there's an individual yelling at your kids, right? You said, I'm yelling at my kids. Who's the I? So I would say to you, you know, if you were to give a name to your dude, what name would you give him?
It can't be my name, because I want to keep that for me. Maybe like boss or something like that.
All right. So boss is the one that's yelling at the kids. And boss is all of those things: irritable, ego-driven, wants things his way, when he wants them, how he wants them. Kids have to be X, Y, or Z, right? And when that's not happening, then the behavior comes out. But I would submit to you that Brad is compassionate and has a huge heart and loves deeply and is a teacher and a leader and loves wholeheartedly and knows how to communicate to his children with love. and anything else is boss. And so if you can get 40,000 feet above it and see that interaction and that play, then the question is, how often is boss driving? And what causes, conditions, triggers, what pattern of living, what design of life based on a series of actions can Brad take so that boss is in the trunk? And then what happens in the environment? What thoughts, feelings, memories, sounds, what happens that puts Brad in the trunk and brings boss out? And then conversely, what needs to happen? Technique, intervention, modality, thought, yoga, working out, music, love, connection to get boss back in the trunk. And so, as you know, there's a lot of processes there. There's a lot of awarenesses that need to happen in there. There's a lot of techniques and habits and things that an individual can do, but the awareness becomes key.
You talked about earlier about metabolizing 4 energies. I think they were stress, shame,
trauma,
and grief. Was that the other one?
Yes.
So, those are hard enough concepts to understand, even in this field where we're talking about this and we have advanced education in that. But for the typical guy listening, what are the differences in those? Like what is stress? How do we define that? How do we know what it is? We think stress is the stuff out there, and it kind of is, but it's also happening on the inside. How do you define stress, shame, trauma, and grief?
Yeah, and as you know, right? So, you've been my supervisor through my internships, and we've had hours of talks of that. And stress, most of us as human beings are aware of. We know what it is. We know how it's caused. We know what it does to us, where we feel it, the body sensations, what to do to get rid of it, to metabolize it. And so those skills, that awareness, that level of mindfulness, those are all transferable skills. And then we move into shame. So the best definition I've found about shame is from Brene Brown.
Mm-hmm.
The intensely painful feeling that I'm unworthy of love and connection. Shame makes it personal. I think shame's probably one of the most toxic energies. Shame says, I am a piece. I don't want to cuss. Shame says I'm a turd, right? Where guilt and remorse will say I did a crappy thing. Shame makes it very personal. And there's a language with shame. It resonates in the body differently than stress. And a good example in our own life. So I was not a Boy Scout growing up, but we got in Boy Scouts, and my first 2 boys became Eagle Scouts, and my third son didn't want to do Scouts. And it was a family goal, and it had a lot of good things attached to it. We went camping and we hung out. We did a lot of things, but my son is turning 12 or 13. He's like, I don't want to be an Eagle Scout. And so, well, what about your older brothers are? Shame. Hey, don't you want to go to this merit badge clinic to advance? Shame. And so all of a sudden in his 12, 13-year-old little brain and body, I'm not good enough. I'm less than my brothers. I'll never measure up. I mean, those are the stimuluses, and that's the
messaging or the internal defining of himself. So
yeah, and we recognize that as parents, and so we just changed the family goal. Let's just unwind this. But that's being astute to how do I speak shame? The thing with shame too, it's baked into every relationship, and every community. So it's baked into the system. So I already know it's there. So it's just finding out where is it? How is it residing? What does it sound like? What does it look like? How do we speak it? How do I hear it? How does someone else receive it? And so there's a lot of work to do just around shame. Yeah. Trauma. Most of us are aware of big T trauma. October 1 shooting, divorce,
sexual abuse.
Yes, all of that. I'm more and more convinced, based on my research, that trauma happens in the small moments of our lives. And the way that the brain works is that we have this adaptive information process. So a memory is created, a hologram's created in the brain. The neurons imprint chemicals onto that hologram, connect a negative cognition or a negative belief about ourselves, and then it gets filed. So it can be that example I gave when I was in 6th grade. That was trauma for me. The image that represented the worst part of that memory was seeing my 2 friends on the sidewalk. And the negative belief that I had about myself was that my voice doesn't matter. I'm insignificant. And as I go through the rest of my life, any other time in my life that I'm made to feel inadequate, insignificant, the brain opens up that file and says, oh, we felt this way at this point in our life, and at this point in our life, and at this point in our life. And so these past experiences now get pushed into our present, and that is essentially a broad definition of trauma, something that's happened to us in our past that now is affecting us in our present day. So those pictures, those images, those memories that have a negative belief about ourselves is how I define trauma. And it can be mom and dad fighting. It can be backyard dollhouse. It can be any picture or image that has energy on it. There's these 2 fibers that connect the left and right hemisphere. And that's one of the ways the brain synthesizes our lived experiences and decides if we need to feel safe in this environment, run, or freeze, right? Well, I often phrase or look at those memories that they have barbed wire on them. Well, if a memory has barbed wire on it, it's not going to go through those fibers. It's not going to get processed. The cognitive brain, the thinking brain, isn't going to be able to deal with something that has yucky or emotions on it. It just wants the facts, figures, data, all the linear stuff. So that's the trauma work, right? And that a lot of that clinically I learned just becoming certified with eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing, the EMDR technique of the trauma, and just sitting with people and getting an understanding of what it means to have life events that have energy for a human. And it happens in the small moments of our life.
It's interesting you're talking about the messaging or whatever. So the thing that happens when you're young, it gets repeated. I took a film studies class, one of my favorite, I got an A in that class, but they talk about theme, and in movies and in books and so forth, the theme is repeated several times through the movies. You got a 2-hour movie, and there are maybe 6 or 7 scenes or parts of the movie that illustrate the same idea. And you're making it seem like that's what happens to us. We have experience after experience that looks familiar. The way I talk with people about their their difficulty is that we're always having to interpret what happens to us. Something happens and we have to interpret it, and we say, what does this mean about me? And I've had the case a few times where I've had interpreters come to my practice for, someone had spoken another language. I've had a couple of deaf clients, and we have these certified interpreters come in, and their job is to take the unfamiliar thing, whether it's the sound of my voice to a deaf person or a person hard of hearing, or who speaks another language, and they take this unfamiliar stimulus and make it familiar for them. The interpreter's job is to change it from unfamiliar to familiar. Well, we're doing that all the time, and we're saying, you're 25 and you're having trouble in your job down on the strip, and you probably are going back to, I know what this is. That's what you're describing, is that these things have happened to us over the years, and we form this belief about ourselves or the world or people, and we filter it through that, and that may be wrong altogether, but that sometimes determines what we're feeling and what we're thinking and what we're doing, and then that leads us to addiction. So trauma. So we talked about stress and trauma. So just briefly with the processing of trauma. Not everybody's been shot at. Not everybody's had those big T things, or even maybe a divorce. But you're saying this stuff happens in the small moments, and everyone's experienced some of that. So when people are thinking that they need some help with this, they want to see a professional. There's obviously different modalities and ways to treat that. But in general terms, what should the person be looking for out of a healing experience? Like there's EMDR and there's different ways to do it, but is it just that they're reinterpreting their past? They're trying to correct the messaging that they have, internalized about themselves or the world or people or women or whatever the situation may be?
Yeah, I think there's always a presenting problem. There's always something that would bring someone to the chair, to the couch, or wanting to reach out. And my wife recently had a desire to play golf. And so rather than me try to show her, teach her, I'm like, let's do it. Let's get a professional. Let's get you golf lessons and have someone who's in that field, who is an instructor, who does that daily, teach you and coach you and mentor you and watch you and explore and get curious with you. And that's what a therapist is. And so anytime where we've identified a problem and we want help, there are instructors, coaches, therapists, whatever you want to call them, to help with that. And so, I'm along with you. The individual is the expert in their lives, not me, not you. They are. And our role is to get curious, ask questions, travel along with them, reframe, explore emotionally. And the most important thing is trust, that therapeutic bond. If that's not there, it doesn't matter what technique, what modality, what intervention the therapist, coach is going to use. If there's no trust, it's going to fall flat. And so trust yourself as you're looking for a therapist. Look, there's certain credentials. You can go onto Psychology Today, and, if you're like most, it's driven by insurance. And so there's going to be a list that therapists that are paneled with that particular insurance company. But that's, I'll have clients who come and are more comfortable with an old white man, such as myself. And I've got others who are uncomfortable and want an old white therapist. It's to confront some of that, to be the mirror and a reflection. The technique, the modality, the intervention, I think that comes after just the trust, but there's always a problem, right? And that's, if we loop back around to the 12 steps and this program, it doesn't really, to me, matter what the problem is. I mean, if it's Alcoholics Anonymous, obviously it's alcohol. If it's Cocaine Anonymous, obviously it's cocaine. If it's sex. But it can be any behavior. It can be hoarding. It can be food. It can be any maladaptive behavior, anger. Those 12-step principles will change an individual's thinking so that the behavior changes. And that's what we essentially want. If you're talking about trauma specifically, what the research shows is that this technique of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, is about 60 to 65% more effective and efficient than talk therapy. Why is that? As a clinician, I don't need to know the story. You know what it is. Your brain knows what it is. I just need to know how to get to it. So sometimes with people's trauma, the telling of the story, it sensitizes the body because now they're in the story and they're reliving it, which means from the brain's perspective, they're sending out chemicals. The brain's reliving the event. And so adrenaline and cortisol get squirted. The body's being sensitive. There's more stress. And so we see that as they're telling the story. The EMDR's 8 phases. The first 2 phases is resource building. Well, trust, resource building, and history taking. And so a lot of it is understanding, can an individual self-soothe? Can an individual self-regulate? If they get angry, pissed off, can they walk themselves back to calm? And how do they do that? And how long does that take? And what do they do to do that? Mm-hmm. And so those are the first 2 phases. Once you get into 3 through 6, that's actually when we're doing the trauma work. Phase 7 is closure, and phase 8 is reevaluation. So what the research shows is that if it's if it's a one-time, like the October 1 shooting, right? The picture or image, blood. What's the negative cognition? What's the negative belief you're having about yourself? I'm not safe. I'm going to die. I'm powerless. Okay. And so we choose that target memory. We take certain measurements. We let the brain do the healing. Your brain wants to figure it out. Your brain is wired to desensitize when we get emotionally charged.
It wants to regulate.
It wants to. It knows how to. It just needs access to the data. But that's where we go, it's yucky. I don't want to relive that. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to feel this way. And so we don't. We push it down. We put it in that containment device that we started talking about earlier. And we put it in there. And then if we don't go to it, or we go through our day and we drive past the site, or we hear something, or we smell something, or we read something and it comes back up, we go, no, I don't want to do that. And we push it back down. It's counterintuitive, but if we would just let it come when it comes and wash over us, it'll come and then it'll go. It's not that we're going to stay in that state of mind forever. So we don't deal with the feelings. We don't deal with the body sensations. It turns toxic in the body. And then another life event happens, and then another, and then the containment gets full, or a life event happens. And then now we're left in crisis or a problem bigger than we know what to handle with. And so here we are.
Man, that's a great introduction to the things that men may need to do if they want to get some help with this. The first you mentioned is trust. If they like who they're talking to, that's going to go a long way. I'm curious, man, have you ever found people who who didn't heal. I mean, if they trusted you and they had the right motivation, they had the right motivation and, did the things you asked them to do. Have you ever seen anyone not be able to get to where they need to go?
The only time it's happened is when they stop coming. The only time it's happened is when they stop coming. And so what I usually try to say to kind of set it into a context is, so for September, October, I've been telling individuals who are new. So I explained to them everything you and I just talked about. And I say, just give me 6 or 8 sessions. Give me till the end of the year. Just come every week or every other week and let's work on this. And I think you'll be amazed before we're halfway through. I think you'll have some understanding of what's going on, because not in the first beginning part of it, I'm also doing assignments and I'm giving them, we're pulling the energies apart. So we're doing some cognitive behavioral therapy and some other things as well. But usually once someone can kind of see the boss and Brad and where that happens in their lives, and that becomes more aware, and then you all of a sudden understand, well, I'm not the boss. That's just ego. That's my character defects. That's my pain. And that's not me. So how do I keep that guy under wraps? Am I able to keep that guy under wraps? And so we talk about that and we learn about it and we reframe it. And then all of a sudden what happens is some of the shame melts away. Because Brad, you're not boss. Boss is boss. And so can you be more of Brad throughout your day? And when you find out that boss is taken over, when did that happen? Why did that happen? What caused, trigger, event caused that to happen? And so all of a sudden you're gaining some more awareness and you're like, oh yeah, now I can start to see it. And so the shame starts to melt away and more authentic you starts to come out. And now there's some inertia starting to happen and the ball's starting to roll. And then conversely, we're taking history about what's going on from your past that may be attached or give boss oxygen.
Handing over the keys. Here,
Yeah.
you take the wheel kind of thing. So I agree with Jimmy, and this isn't just, tooting our own horns as professionals, because I know people, it doesn't matter who you go to. It doesn't matter what type of thing they do. If you trust them and you have a great rapport and they are, and you're willing to do the work and you don't give up prematurely on it, it just takes a little bit of time. I want to go back to some of the body stuff. So you mentioned the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And when I introduce that to people, I usually say, there's a lot of clinical stuff in there. You may not like it. It's a long book, but the title says almost everything.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about this thing that happened when you're 6 years old all the time, but your body, it remembers it. And so every time there's something that comes along that says, your voice doesn't matter and you don't, you're of no concern to the world, and just keep your feelings to yourself, and whatever those messages were, it produces energy in our body. That's what we experience sometimes as depression or anxiety or those kind of things. What does that start to look like in the body when people are healing? So they come in all dysregulated. They can't settle down. They can't, you mentioned self-soothe. They don't know how to do that. We're going to always have, stress and pressure and things like that. But how does it look for people in their bodies when they start to do the healing? Because we're saying feelings buried alive never die. They just become more toxic. They're kind of festering and infecting every other part of our life. How is it what's happening to people's bodies when they're healing, shame and trauma and those types of things?
Well, the body's an instrument. The body is constantly feeding data to the brainstem. And so some of it is the disassociation, right? Separating the body for a number of reasons. So it's getting back connected and feeling the body. It's a sensitive instrument. And for me, it wasn't. I was callous towards it, apathetic. I was not willing to listen or didn't want to hear it or feel it. And so I would just suppress it and push it down. And so I had to learn to let those feelings, the body sensations happen. And just like with any muscle, the more that you work it, it will break down in the lactic acid, and then it can regrow. But sometimes getting the muscle to the point of working it out till it stresses out and it can't do another set or rep is what it takes. But that's true with feelings as well. And so it's not, I haven't worked out in a while. And so the weight, my machismo wants to think, well, yeah, when I was in my heyday, I could bench 315. I would probably start out by putting 10s, maybe 25s on the bench right now, because I don't want to hurt myself. But I know I'd walk through if I'm in a gym of like, well, what is these guys going to say? They're judging me. I don't fucking care. Like, I need to be okay with where I'm at, right? And just do the 25s and work till failure and then rest. And it's that way with the body. There's exercises, there's an awareness, there's mindfulness, there's all types of exercises, interventions, modalities that one can do as we start to pay attention and be mindful. I think, we've talked about it. The one that you can do tonight, when you go to brush your teeth, take the toothbrush, put whatever toothpaste, and then I want you to pay attention to how do the bristles feel on the teeth or the bone? What's that sensation? Then I want you to brush the gums and notice that sensation. And then the tongue, and then the cheek. So those are different surfaces that are going to feel different on the toothbrush, and you'll have a different sensation in the body if you pay attention. And that level of awareness is part of what we're talking about. This is something you can do and you can practice that. But what that means is not thinking about what I have to do or what's next, or I got to put the kids down, or I got to make this, or I got to do like, if you're just brushing your teeth mindlessly, you're not going to feel or pay attention to any of that. And so now I'm having to be very present with my toothbrush and those body sensations.
You talked about this in other episodes where awareness alone, just tuning into what's happening with your body, that if we want to try to regulate it, you got to know what it feels like. You got to know where it is. Where does this thing live? This stress or this grief or this shame, and what does it, maybe look like, and kind of give it some character. And you have to be listening and looking. I also loved your example with working out. It's as silly to go into a therapy session or a 12-step meeting. James, in one of our recent episodes, talked about after the second meeting, he thought he had it. He knew what he needed to know, and he was good. And that maybe wasn't the case. I'm curious about how long it took you, because if you go to the gym, no one's going to say, look, I did 2 workouts, man. I'm good. It's really, I'm going to commit to this thing forever. And if I want to continue to improve, I've got to stay in the gym. And that doesn't mean therapy or even 12-step meetings. I actually don't attend meetings anymore. But what length of time from when I think you talked about you went in some residential type treatment, from your first initiation of going for help to where you really started to turn the corner and people noticed and you noticed and you really had some things figured out? Not perfect yet, but how long does this take?
A lifetime. Again, it's a design of life, a pattern of living based on a series of actions taken one day at a time. I will step into vulnerability and I'll share with you where the work I'm at right now with me. So 2009 is when I had my last drink or drug. And I came from a place of self-hate. I loathed what I had become and what I represented. And certainly the addiction was the motor. And then at that point, my mental health was really the thing that tipped me over the edge. I had an incident where these voices started to happen separate from, and then it was that voice, subsequently he's called Jim, who's telling me I need to kill myself. You're toxic. If you're in anyone's life, you just screw it up, and all you're going to do is drug. And so that led to my suicide attempt. And then when that didn't work, then I'm like, I'm supposed to live in hell and torture for the remaining days. Okay. So 14 years later, I had surgery on my foot. The surgeon told me 4 weeks, you can't drive, you keep it elevated. We talked about I'm in recovery. He's like, especially just so the pain, anytime you put the foot down. And so I was scared, and I didn't and wasn't going to use pain medication. So I had ice and ibuprofen and Skittles.
Skittles.
And so I literally am on the couch. I even found on Amazon these beautiful urine bags. I didn't have to get off the couch. I could just turn over on my side. There was like this diaper, so it turned the liquid into a solid. You could zip it up and just throw it away. So I'm not moving off the couch. The first week, I binge watched television till I was just like, can't watch any. I don't want to watch TV. Second week, shopping. I mean, money. I spent I'm like, dude, stop. Third week, self-pity. And I'm starting to notice, and I'm telling my sweetheart, listen, I'm starting to get into some self-pity. I can feel it, just my internal conversations. So just have some latitude with me. So she comes home from work. It was on a Tuesday. She comes in, she does her normal stuff. Now, granted, my normal schedule is she's up at like 5, out the door by 7. I'm up at 7. She's home and in bed by 8. I don't get home till 9. So we don't really see each other till Friday night. Well, I'm sitting on the couch, and so I'm seeing her every day for the last 3 weeks. And, so she does her normal routine. She's like, hey, I'm getting ready to go to bed. And these are the words that came out of my mouth. Yeah, but I was hoping that we could talk. She's like, honey, I'm tired. I've had a long day. So I said to her, oh, that must be nice that all of your employees get 100% of you, but you come home and I get the scraps. And she looked at me, and I saw that face and the look. And I said, hold on a second. I'm sorry. Hold up. Just give me 1 second. And so I took a breath. And what I realized is it was like this conduit brought me back to when I was about 25 years old. And I'm new in my career in the hotel industry. And I'm working 12 hours a day. And she's raising our 3 boys. And I'm coming home exhausted. And she would say, yeah, honey, I just want to connect with you. And it made me feel a certain way. And so I would make her feel bad. I would make her feel wrong. I would gaslight her. I would try to twist what she was feeling so that she wouldn't do that to me anymore. And it was like all this came rushing back into my mind. And I said, honey, I owe you an amends. I'm realizing that that's what I used to do to you when you came home. And what I should have done back then is given you a hug and just sat with you and asked you how your day was. But I didn't. I was a jerk. And I'm sorry. And that only happens as a result of me being willing to take an honest self-assessment, to look at myself, to look at my behavior, to when things come up in my life, what's my part in that? What role do I have in that? And if I'm willing to do that, beautiful things like this moment for my wife and I, it was so validating for her, for me to make amends and apologize for being that guy. And it brought us closer together. It was healing for both of us. And I'm in this space now where the mantra that I say is talk less, smile more, and take her counsel. Like, my wife's amazing. And there's a pocket of her life that's void of Jimmy by design. And she excels on all metrics in that area of her life. And then she comes home and it's, oh, Jimmy, the therapist, and let me tell you this, and let me tell you that, and let's deconstruct this, and let's deconstruct that, and why are you feeling this way? How are you feeling this way? And was that connected? Like, blah. Like, dude, just shut up. Talk less, smile more, and listen to what she has to say, because she's got some great counsel. And so that's where I'm in. So to answer your question, for me, it happens one day at a time, based on a series of action, based on a plan of living and a design of life, where I choose to step into being the best version of myself, to lead with love, and to be wholehearted.
Man, I just love the way you understand this stuff. I love how you have done the work yourself. You're talking about current struggles, current things. I'm in self-pity. You have the awareness not only to catch yourself in the middle of this conversation doing that, and luckily she gave you the eyes or whatever, but it also took you back to a time that you had, kind of unrepaired, and you all in one conversation. This is what maturity looks like, you guys. All in one conversation, you catch yourself being stupid, being selfish. Jim's running that.
Yes.
In that moment. And then you scale that back and you say, wait a minute. And this also reminds me of when I was doing this kind of thing. And you talk about a 180 flip. We're handing the wheel over to Jimmy, who is full of love and has nothing but love and knows how to handle things. And you gave him back the keys, and he's driving now. So I'm curious, man, about your view on the 12 steps. Obviously, you're all in on that. When people come to you, when men have, they've gone there and they don't want to do it. They don't like to sit around and talk. Oh, I can't, I don't have space to listen to other people's feelings and all their stories. I got enough drama. I can't be patient with it. I don't want to talk about God or whatever their,
resistance. Yeah.
What do you share with people who, because there is more than one way.
Absolutely.
I'm a believer in the 12-step program too, but I can empathize, I think, with people who they've got some spiritual wounds. They got forced to go to Sunday school or whatever when they were a kid, and they don't want to do anything related to that. But if a man he wants help, he knows he needs someone he can trust. You mentioned that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the programs and the options, do you push for that? How do you explain that to people?
Yeah, I think I'm a lot more, I still do 2 meetings a week. And I've noticed myself just being more accepting. I was very militant in the beginning, and understandably, I was trying to save my ass. I mean, I was hanging on by a thread, and I was trying to keep I wanted to stay married and I wanted to get back involved with my kids. And I think it's meeting the individual where they're at. Above all, love matters. Above all, what I needed in the beginning was love. We'll get to the steps. We'll get to all that. I mean, I just needed connection. I needed to know that there was something good in me. And so wherever an individual is on that spectrum, if someone's caught in the throes of addiction, right? So there's use, misuse, abuse, and addiction. So if someone's in that realm, they're swimming in shame. And it doesn't matter how eloquent, how articulate, how gentle I try to suggest or frame or talk, but they're going to hear is shame. And so it's just love, you know? Yeah. I mean, I've got someone now who, when I was running an intensive outpatient treatment center back in 2016, 17, she came through, got sober, went away, is drinking and active. And she reaches out and, hey, I need help. And I'm just there to love and support and offer suggestions. And it's up to the individual, because I know what's going to happen when it's that type of, when we're dealing with the addiction, is it's only going to get worse. So it's chronic, happens over and over and over and over again. It's progressive, so it always gets worse. And it's fatal. Those are the three characteristics of addiction. And so it's a timing thing. And God willing, they don't die. And that's the piece of just being in this arena, is people die. I've got a relative who's stage 4 pancreatic cancer from decades and decades and decades of drinking. 5 years clean. And this individual is going to be dead soon.
Wow.
So 12 steps. Yeah. What I always say is, listen, if the 12 steps work, if you can go into any of those rooms and look for the similarities, not the differences, look for the similarities, then what we have is a plug and play. It works really nice. It's got a textbook, it's got groups, it's got mentorship, it's all there, and it's free. So if it works, great. If it doesn't, that's okay. Like there's other things. There's lots and lots of ways to skin this cat. And so I'm not stuck on that particular. If it works, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. Like we'll figure it out. Like what I know the individual needs is love.
So for the loved ones, maybe, so that guy maybe recognizes that he needs that, and he may take a slow path towards something like that. But the loved ones and people around them, they can help them experience that. You said if they could just see that there's something good in them. And that's hard to do if they've, that's ripped you off and, treated you poorly and, lied and cheated and whatever else. But to the loved ones, what would you say to the family and the people who are around this guy?
So it certainly is a family disease. This is certainly problematic for the family system. So if you look at systems, and the addiction is the outlier, it's going to affect everyone connected to that system. It's interesting because I have another individual. The family came to me, hey, we need help for our son. Okay, great. He's since relapsed. And the family was like, listen, this is the last final, they've been dealing with this for decades. Well, what happens if there's a relapse? Well, right now he's living in the house. If he does, then he needs to go away. Are you okay with that? So we spent some time on that. Yes, this is what we're going to do. So he relapsed. Well, guess where he's living? In the house.
Still there.
Yeah. And so they sent me a text. Hey, what? And I started to text, hey, what happened? I thought you were going to kick this guy out. He probably should be homeless. Like, let him hit the bottom. Like, well, and I'm backspace. No, suck that back in. What does love look like? Okay, this sucks. So if the addict is a mirror or a symptom of a system that's unhealthy, then anyone connected to that system can step into an opportunity to say, okay, this is a mirror. And so what's my part in this? What can I learn? Where am I unhealthy? What's my part in this? Generally, we get into codependency, which means becoming dependent on what and how the addict is behaving and feeling.
That they need them to behave in that way. They need the same sickness.
Yeah. Yes. And why isn't I'm not able to have a boundary of, well, this is the 8th time and we've taken out a loan and we're emotionally, mentally, physically bankrupt. And yet, we're going to have you come back into the house again. And what is it? And that's the unwinding, right? Because I hear this term self-love or tough love. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. Love is love. There's a healthy way to communicate that crucial conversation. And it's the name of a good book, Crucial Conversation. And in it, they have an acronym called the CPR: content, pattern, reaction, response. And we get caught up in the content. Well, he did this and he's feeling about this and the wife's doing this and the kids are doing this and the job is doing. Listen, that's the content. What's the pattern? What is the pattern that you see with him? What is the pattern you see within the system, within the family? And if we can address and identify the pattern, and then how do we move the pattern to being more healthy, more adaptive, more responsive? What would that look like? And so usually with the family, it has to do with that. And then you're dealing with, okay, what does boundaries look like? Now you start getting into maybe their history or their trauma or their shame, their work, right? And it looks different for everyone, but it's a hairball.
Well, and I love your point about that they have some work to do probably. If what the addict is doing is mirroring something from the rest of the system, they may have an important part, and it's not their fault. That's not the point of it, but just that there's all this energy spinning around itself and each other, and they may be able to correct some of the things that they're doing unintentionally. There's this accidental feeding, we're watering the weeds. We're accidentally doing the things sometimes that produces what we don't want. We create and perpetuate the things that we hate sometimes. And so if you're the loved one, reach out to someone yourself. There are programs for the loved ones, Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous, and lots of different things. Jimmy, I want to wrap this up here today. I'm just wondering if you have any last, thoughts or words. We're talking about addiction. We've talked about, sex, gambling. We talked about cocaine, alcohol. People have come at this with different things. You've mentioned some of your own stuff, bulimia, heroin, pills, pornography, so many elements of that. You talked about the changes that you needed to make, the need to trust the person that you're working with. You talk about getting back to love, that there are two energies, but only one can drive the car at a time. You've talked at some length in some of the other episodes about Jim and Jimmy and how you've kind of separated that self, and you're choosing to kind of identify with the part of you that is whole and loving and full of all of the good things. What would you say is last remarks here for our men listening?
I would say that addiction is not lacking moral fortitude. It's not framed medically as a disease. Lack of self-will. That someone's bad or broken or wrong. I think addiction is symptomatic of someone's pain and suffering. And that the addiction or abuse, substance abuse, or anger, or hoarding, or eating, fill in the blank, that attaches to the suffering in an effort to bring awareness and mindfulness to that part of the individual that needs hope, that needs healing. It takes a lot of courage as a man to say, I need help, that I'm hurting, that I have pain. And it's what I've always admired about you and your conviction to create a space that men can help connect with other men so that we can be better. And that was part of the construct that I had that kept me trapped. I had a belief that through the addiction that I had to, in order to ask for help, I had to admit that I was wrong, bad, broken, that I was weak, that I lacked some moral fortitude. And I'm not wired. I don't think most men are wired to go, oh yeah, that's me. So I would rather get choked out. I would rather have died than to have admitted to any one or all of those things. So I was stuck because I wasn't going to do that. I was not going to admit that I was wrong, bad, broken, weak, that I lacked moral fortitude. Not going to happen. But I didn't have a lot of solutions. And I'm caught. And it doesn't matter, I don't think, what the solution is. Alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, eating, hoarding, fill in the blank, gambling. So I would say to that individual, you're none of those things. You're not. You just need the right medicine for the mind. Whatever creates a little sliver of opening, that'll allow that individual with dignity to reach out and get help. And if it is addiction, please don't die. Please don't die. You know, you're none of those things. And there is hope, and there is a way. And it takes courage to admit that we need another man. And the interesting construct with that is what underpins courage is vulnerability. So it takes a man to be vulnerable in order to walk through. And the more men that we have that are willing to be vulnerable, that are willing to share authentically and be transparent, the better the world. And so I stand by you, shoulder to shoulder, and with all the other men, so that we can do and be better.
Man, I love what you're sharing here tonight, man. Jimmy, you've been just a hero to me, man. It's just you, the way that you approach life, the way that you see yourself. You've said some great things about your wife over the years that I've known you, just, you know, the struggles that you had, and that most of that was you. And how you've gotten control of yourself, and how she's elevated as well. And you've both, you both just seem to be living great lives right now. Obviously not perfect, but doing some good things. You guys, we're talking about this because there's a high likelihood that you got some compulsive behavior. You're doing some stuff to numb yourself, to disconnect, to push those feelings down. And as Jimmy's taught here and in other episodes, feelings that are buried alive never die. They just become more toxic. They just fester. They just get infected, and they seep into everything. And it's going to create a problem if it's not already. If you've listened to this show to this point and these episodes, I'm guessing there's some problems. And Jimmy is just, to me, another great example, like the other men that we've had on this in this series, who has gone from homeless, using heroin and doing all these crazy things that were destructive. Those things were just designed. He was just trying to cope with his life and his feelings that he didn't know what to do with. And he showed up in places where people could help him. He got the golf coach. He got the golf pro. Now he is the golf pro when it comes to recovery and helping men deal with those four energies: stress, shame, trauma, and grief. You guys, appreciate you listening to what we're producing here. Give us a like and a share and a follow, and whatever platform that may be, whatever the thing is, you know what to do. We don't have any advertising. We may do that at some point, but the way you can support us is just to share this and give us your feedback. If you listen to this show, text me, get in touch with Jimmy. Let's hear from you. We want to know how this has impacted your life. We know that about 300 men are going to listen to this episode. Some women, maybe 20% women in there. Those are usually the wives. They're trying to get their husbands on board. So thank you again, Jimmy. Really appreciate you being here. You guys, until next time, no excuses. Alpha up.
Alpha up.
Good stuff, dude. You're a freaking master. That's all there is to it.
If you're a man that controls his own destiny, a man that is always in the pursuit of being better, you are in the right place. You are responsible. You are strong. You are a leader. You are a force for good. Gentlemen, you are the Alpha, and this is the Alpha Quorum.